Hey, I'm Scott Lee. First show here. I want to talk about Metroid for a second, okay? And I have an opinion that probably isn't going to be very popular with a lot of Metroid fans, but I feel like it needs to be said if we ever want to see a really good Metroid game again. Most people, especially the critics, would unanimously agree that Super Metroid was a really outstanding game. And in fact, if you look at it by itself, it's a great game without the rest of the saga. It has a really basic story to it, sure, but that basic story is worked with very, very well, and it basically defined a lot of what we today know as the Metroidvania genre. Super Metroid took very, very basic pieces and turned them into something that had a lot of sort of complexity and depth to it that players had not seen before. Number one, they had not seen a game of that size before, but number two, they had not seen something that was so sort of minimalistic in its storytelling, but at the same time, when that ending comes and you're fighting Mother Brain, it has such a powerful emotional impact. The other Metroid games suffer from a very common mistake that often happens in movies. Movies, whenever you see a good one, they usually have a protagonist, or, like the good guy character. Then they have the supervillain, or the bad guy character, as it's sometimes referred to. And then you have a central conflict between the two, or at least this is how it is with like a lot of like fantasy adventure type movies and things like that. And then with that central conflict, you usually are introduced to that within the first 10 minutes. You know exactly what's going on. You have a reason to root for the main character because they're very relatable, a very clear idea of what motivates them and what is driving them to fight against some conflict. So the other Metroid games introduce a lot of story to like the main Metroid saga that is kind of counter to that, and they don't really add anything in that is completely necessary. I think a lot of people today are making the mistake that like they think that Metroid as a series is actually about the character of Samus Aran, which like was never true, right? If you think back to it, Samus Aran was always a very minimal character. The very first game, whenever it came out in the 1980s, we thought that this was like a dude in a spacesuit. We didn't really care who it was because we actually kind of personified this person with like ourselves. And so, okay, we find out it's a female at the end. That's cool, Nintendo, but that really doesn't do anything to contribute to the idea that like this is a deep character with like a lot of different facets to them. And then at some point, Nintendo decided, okay, well, we want to go back and tell the story of Samus Aran, which they never really needed to do, right? At the most that you could derive about Samus Aran's character was from the mechanics of the games, and that usually meant that she probably wasn't a vegetarian, probably didn't like animals very much, was a ruthless badass who was not afraid to like kill everything in sight. And since we know that in Metroid 2, Samus was instructed and then carried out the complete execution or near execution of an entire species, aside from the baby Metroid hatchling, Samus is not a compassionate character. The most that we see is at the end of Super Metroid. Part of the reason that that's so powerful, if you're following the saga, is that, and in the context of the saga, is that Samus has like this moment where she is saved by the very thing that she has been spending all of this time killing off and getting rid of, under humanity's belief that the Metroids are like this great threat to the galaxy. Metroids are not just these like killing machines. They're not just there to wipe out all of human life. When we go back and we look at the other games, the main first three Metroid games, that is to say Metroid 2, The Return of Samus, and Super Metroid, which is really like the official Metroid 1, 2, and 3, those tell a complete sort of story arc in a very real sort of sense, where we introduce the conflict of the Metroids being a threat to the galaxy in the first game and fighting against Mother Brain. Then we say, okay, well, the Metroids were a threat to everybody, so in the second game we go and we have to annihilate all the Metroids, right? But what we don't realize is that we may be doing something very wrong there, which we come to learn about in the very end of the story, at least the end as it probably should be, in Super Metroid. But then all the other games deal with an unnecessary plot point. We don't need Fusion. The story's already over. We don't need Other M, because we don't need to know about Samus Aran. We don't need the Metroid Prime games, because the Prime stories are completely unnecessary to the main story arc of the trilogy. You don't need to endlessly add games to a character's story arc. Like, we were not told anything about her for years. We didn't need to know anything. You don't make that character just, like, last for 500 years in a bunch of games and you repeat the same process over and over again, where you take away her powers at the end or the beginning of every story, and then you go and you have to explore Planet X, and by Planet X I mean planet fill in the blank, to go get the upgrades and repeat the whole process over and over again. When fans come and see Metroid Prime Federation Force, and they get really angry about the fact that this looks like a really bad game and it doesn't even have Samus in it, and it doesn't contribute anything to the Metroid story, well, sorry to break this to you, Metroid fanbase, but the whole thing was already kind of ruined. Metroid Prime Federation Force was probably never going to be good. And the current people behind Metroid trying to take it in these directions, this is the problem, is that they don't understand the things that made the best Metroid game of all time, Super Metroid, so great. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope to do more videos here on this channel. It's subject to Jacob and John with Digicades that will allow me to do this. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe if you like this, favorite, and share.